At 10 o'clock p.m. on August 23, 1944, Sergeant Bob Tompkins hunkered down behind a hedgerow outside Brest, inflating a rubber tank merely 2 kilometers from German anti-tank batteries. At 27 years old, he'd already participated in 4 deception missions, yet he'd never destroyed a single real tank. Defending the Brest fortress, the Germans had amassed 38,000 troops. Tompkins connected an air compressor to the collapsed mock-up of a Sherman tank. Earlier that day, the 603rd Camouflage Engineers had navigated 190 meters through driving rain. They'd gone without sleep or hot meals, operating solely on orders from the 8th Corps. Simulate 2 tank battalions to convince General Rama that 30,000 American troops were poised to assault his right flank. Their tools? Just 1,100 men and inflatable rubber replicas. Slowly, the tank took shape. A full-scale M4 Sherman weighing a mere 93 pounds. By contrast, a real Sherman tipped the scales at 33 tons. This rubber facsimile would crumple if someone leaned on it too heavily. 800 yards away, German observers watched from the church tower in Ganu. 2 men Tompkins had spotted earlier through binoculars. They were likely artillery spotters, relaying coordinates to their forces even as he worked. The Ghost Army, as they'd come to be known, carried no heavy weaponry, no artillery, no armor, only carbines and 50 caliber machine guns. Their true weapon was deception. Inflatable tanks that looked authentic from 500 yards, sound trucks blaring recordings of tank engines and barking sergeants, radio operators mimicking real military units, and artists painting fake insignias on jeeps. Formally designated the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, the unit had been activated in January 1944. Its 1,100 members boasted an average IQ of 119, a diverse group of artists, engineers, actors, and draftees. Among them were fashion designer Bill Blass, painter Ellsworth Kelly, photographer Art Kane. West Point graduates mingled with art school dropouts. They'd arrived in France in May 1944, 2 weeks after D-Day. Their first mission had been to simulate a Mulberry Harbor using lights, diverting German artillery fire from the real floating harbors. Next came Operation Fortitude, where they fabricated an entire army near Pas-de-Calais, tricking Hitler into believing the main Allied invasion would land there instead of Normandy. With each mission, they drew closer to the front lines and to the risk of discovery. 3 men had already been killed and 30 wounded by artillery fire. Now at Brest, their mission was more desperate than ever. The 8th Corps had 3 infantry divisions, the 2nd, 8th, and 29th, surrounding the port, but General Patton needed those divisions for his push across France. The Ghost Army's task was to hold the line with fake units while the real divisions withdrew. If the Germans saw through the ruse and attacked, 1,100 men armed with light weapons stood no chance of stopping them. The compressor hissed as Tompkins worked. Each tank took 20 minutes to inflate. Task Force X, under the command of Captain Oscar Seal, needed 15 inflatable Shermans ready by dawn. The 200-man task force was tasked with impersonating the 15th Tank Battalion, anchored by just 1 real tank company from the 709th Tank Battalion. Everything else was an illusion. Tompkins checked his watch. 2:30 a.m., with only 3.5 hours until dawn. They still had 11 tanks to inflate. By 6 a.m., German reconnaissance planes would be overhead, Luftwaffe pilots armed with cameras. If the tanks looked fake from the air, the entire operation would fail. If they looked real, German artillery would zero in on their position with 88mm high-explosive shells. Private James Anderson, a former auto mechanic from Virginia, helped position the next tank. Using a bulldozer, he carved fake tank tracks, creating the illusion that dozens of Shermans had traversed the area. The inflation pump jammed. Tompkins cleared the blockage and resumed. The rubber Sherman slowly expanded. Turret, hull, tracks. Up close, it looked absurd, but from 800 yards away, through German binoculars, it appeared deadly. By 3 a.m., they'd inflated 13 tanks. Anderson continued creating track patterns while other men strung camouflage netting and set up fake encampments to make it look like tank crews were sleeping nearby. At 3:30 a.m., the sound trucks arrived, playing vinyl recordings of tank engines and shouting sergeants, loud enough for German listening posts to hear, but not so loud as to sound artificial. Dawn broke at 6:12 a.m., and at 6:47 a.m., a Luftwaffe reconnaissance plane appeared, flying at 3,000 feet. It made 2 passes, cameras clicking, before vanishing. By noon, 8th Corps intercepted German radio traffic. The enemy was repositioning between 20 and 50 88mm anti-tank guns. The deception had worked, but now those guns were pointed directly at Tompkins and his rubber tanks. 6 months earlier, in January 1944, the Ghost Army had existed only as an idea in a London office. Major Ralph Ingersoll had studied reconnaissance photos from North Africa, where British deception operations, using dummy tanks, fake supply depots, and sound effects, had fooled Field Marshal Rommel, the Desert Fox. Ingersoll showed the photos to Colonel Billy Harris, arguing, "We need this for Normandy." The challenge was scale. The Allies were planning the largest amphibious invasion in history, D-Day, with 150,000 men targeting 5 beaches. Hitler had 50 divisions in France, waiting and watching. If they learned the true location and timing of the invasion, it would be a disaster. Deception was nothing new. George Washington had used it at Trenton, but the U.S. Army had never before fielded a unit dedicated solely to tactical deception. There were no training manuals, no doctrine, no specialized equipment. They would have to invent everything from scratch. Harris secured approval in early January to activate the Special Troops Unit. Its mission? Deceive the enemy about Allied strength and locations, saving lives through illusion. Recruiting was key. Combat soldiers knew how to fight, engineers knew how to build, but who could lie convincingly on the battlefield? Harris sought creative minds, artists who understood perspective and shadow, sound engineers who could fabricate audio recordings, radio operators who could mimic real units, and actors who could stay in character under pressure. Recruitment launched in late January. The unit drew men from existing units like the 603rd Engineer Camouflage Battalion and the 244th Signal Company, supplementing them with new draftees with unusual skills. By April, the unit was ready. 1,100 men divided into 4 subunits: the 603rd for visual deception, the Signal Company Special for radio deception, the 406th Combat Engineers for security, and the Sonic Company for audio deception. But readiness was relative. No one knew if their tactics would work in Normandy's hedgerows and villages, a far cry from the open deserts where British deception had succeeded against Rommel. An advance party of 7 men, Colonel Rear and 6 officers, flew to England on April 10th, tasked with integrating deception into the invasion plan with less than 2 months until D-Day. The main force sailed for England on the USS Henry Gibbons in early May, crossing the Atlantic in 13 days and arriving in Bristol on May 15th. By then, Operation Fortitude was already underway, a massive British deception effort involving fake army groups and phantom divisions, all designed to convince Hitler the invasion would hit Pas-de-Calais, not Normandy. The Ghost Army would support this ruse, but their training in Tennessee, controlled conditions, no enemy fire, had not prepared them for operating within artillery range of German guns. On June 6, 1944, at 6:30 a.m., the Allies stormed the Normandy beaches. The Ghost Army remained in England, frustrated, inflating practice tanks in Stratford-upon-Avon, while real soldiers died on Omaha and Utah beaches. 2 weeks later, on June 21st, a 20-man detachment crossed the Channel for their first mission in France, simulating a Mulberry Harbor with lights to draw German artillery away from the real artificial harbors at Arromanches. The mission almost worked too well. So many Allied lights already lit up the coast that their contribution was negligible. But it taught them a critical lesson. German artillery spotters were watching, calculating, and waiting for targets. The full unit arrived in France on June 23rd, bivouacking near the beaches where the smell of cordite still lingered and burned-out tanks littered the hedgerows. This was not Tennessee. Their first real test came in July during Operation Brittany. Patton's Third Army was racing east across France, and the Ghost Army's job was to create confusion by splitting into 4 task forces, each impersonating a combat team from a different division: the 35th Infantry, 85th Infantry, 95th Infantry, and 2nd Armored. While real divisions pushed east, the fake units turned west and south into Brittany, complete with fake bumper markings, shoulder patches, and radio traffic. Men visited cafes wearing the wrong insignia, dropping false information in hopes of being overheard by German spies. Captain George Rebbe commanded the security element, tasked with protecting the deception, even from other American units. If their own army didn't know about the ruse, The Germans stood no chance of uncovering it. The operation ran from August 9th to 12th, 1944. German intelligence intercepted the fake radio traffic and reported 4 American combat teams moving into Brittany, prompting Hitler's commanders to reposition forces. By the time the Germans realized the columns were fake, Patton was already approaching Paris. Success brought new pressures. Every corps commander wanted the Ghost Army's support, but deception required time, planning, and precision. A single mistake, an off-key radio transmission, a poorly placed inflatable tank, a sound effect played too loudly, could expose them, and exposure meant death. Lieutenant Colonel Frederick Day learned this at Brest, where he volunteered to establish radio contact with notional columns, driving into the city under German fire, helping capture 300 enemy soldiers, and earning a Bronze Star. He also saw firsthand what would happen if the Ghost Army was discovered. Artillery would obliterate them in minutes. The men understood they were bait. Their job was to look dangerous, luring the Germans into committing resources to counter a non-existent threat, all while positioning themselves within enemy artillery and sniper range. The officers minimized risk by posting guards, keeping escape routes clear, and never staying in one place too long, but danger was unavoidable. By late August, the unit had completed 5 deception operations, with 3 men killed and 18 wounded, all by random artillery fire, the price of operating too close to the front. On August 25, 1944, at 6 a.m., the 8th Corps launched its attack on Brest. The 2nd Infantry Division struck the north, the 8th the center, and the 29th the south. 75,000 Americans against 38,000 Germans. The Ghost Army had done its job. German intelligence reported American tank battalions threatening both flanks, and General Rama had repositioned his 88mm guns. But Tompkins and Task Force X were already gone, having deflated the rubber tanks at 4 a.m., packed them onto trucks, and withdrawn before the real attack began. A standard procedure: create the illusion, then vanish before the enemy realizes they've been fooled. The attack on Brest was brutal. Rommel's paratroopers were dug in deeper than expected, with bunkers, pillboxes, and interlocking fields of fire. The Americans advanced just 200 yards in 8 hours, suffering 300 casualties on the first day. 8th Corps intelligence credited the Ghost Army with weakening the German center by drawing away anti-tank guns, reducing American tank losses. Company D of the 709th Tank Battalion, the real unit that had supported Task Force X, reported lighter resistance on the right flank. The deception hadn't won the battle, but it had tilted the odds. Brest fell on September 19, 1944, after 27 days of fighting, with 10,000 American casualties and the entire German garrison killed or captured. No rest awaited the Ghost Army. On September 8th, they received orders for Operation Bettenburg. Patton was attacking the fortress city of Metz, and his lines were dangerously thin. A gap existed between attacking units that, if discovered by the Germans, could lead to a counterattack cutting off an entire American division. The Ghost Army's mission: hold the gap with 1,100 men impersonating 15,000. Unlike Brest, where they'd supported a real attack, at Bettenburg, they were the only American presence in a critical sector. Lieutenant Robert Hiller commanded the sonic operation, positioning sound trucks just behind the front line to play recordings of tank movements, infantry assemblies, and artillery emplacements. Radio operators mimicked an entire division headquarters, transmitting fake supply requests, patrol reports, and battalion movement orders. The operation ran from September 15th to 22nd, 1944. 7 days of holding empty positions with nothing but sound and radio signals. German artillery fired sporadic harassment rounds into the sector, wounding 3 Ghost Army soldiers who were setting up a sound truck. But the operation succeeded. German reconnaissance never discovered the gap, and Patton's attack continued. By September 22nd, real American units had moved in, and the Ghost Army withdrew. To date, they'd completed 2 successful major operations, Brittany and Bettenburg, with 3 dead and 48 wounded. A remarkably low toll given 6 weeks of operating within artillery range. But the men were exhausted, broken by constant movement, sleep deprivation, and the psychological strain of deception. Drawing enemy fire without being able to fight back, knowing every radio transmission was being monitored by German intelligence. In December 1944, they would face their greatest test yet, the Battle of the Bulge, Hitler's last major offensive in the West. On December 16th at 5:30 a.m., German artillery opened fire along a 50-mile front in the Ardennes. 29 divisions, 250,000 men, Hitler's desperate gamble to split the Allied armies. The Ghost Army was in Luxembourg, 60 miles from the initial breakthrough, close enough to help, far enough to be safe for now. Within 12 hours of the German offensive, tanks had punched through American lines, surrounding entire battalions and breaking down communications. Confusion spread. No one knew where the Germans were or how far they'd advanced. General Omar Bradley needed information, reserves, and most critically, time to stop the German breakthrough. Every American division was committed. No reserves remained, except the Ghost Army's 1,100 men and their inflatable tanks. Bradley's staff proposed Operation Kodak, a radio-only deception. No visual displays, no sound effects, just fake communications suggesting 2 full divisions were moving to positions south of the breakthrough. The Ghost Army would create phantom reinforcements, tricking German intelligence into believing American reserves were arriving and forcing Hitler's commanders to divert forces to counter a non-existent threat. The mission was extraordinarily dangerous. The front line was fluid, and German forces were advancing. The Ghost Army could stumble into enemy positions at any moment. Radio operators began transmitting on December 19th, impersonating the 75th Infantry Division and the 6th Armored Division, 2 powerful combat units supposedly moving toward Bastogne. The fake 75th sent supply requests, movement orders, and reconnaissance reports, while the fake 6th Armored transmitted tank maintenance logs, fuel requisitions, and artillery coordination messages. Hundreds of transmissions daily, all mirroring the exact communication styles, abbreviations, and timing patterns of real units. German intelligence intercepted every message. Their direction-finding equipment triangulated the transmission sources, plotted the units' locations, and assessed American strength, and they believed it. Post-war German reports would later mention American reinforcements moving south, exactly as the Ghost Army had simulated. But the ruse carried risks. If German commanders believed 2 divisions were arriving, they might launch a preemptive attack. Radio operators worked from trucks parked in frozen fields, with temperatures dropping below zero. Equipment malfunctioned, vacuum tubes shattered in the cold. Men transmitted with frozen fingers, knowing every message made them more visible to German direction-finding teams. 30 miles to the north, the real battle raged. The 101st Airborne Division was surrounded in Bastogne, low on ammunition and without resupply or reinforcements, ordered only to hold. Patton was racing north with 3 divisions to break the siege, but he needed time. Operation Kodak gave him that time. For 4 days, German intelligence tracked the phantom divisions, repositioning forces to counter the fake threat. By the time they realized the reinforcements were an illusion, Patton had reached Bastogne. The siege was lifted on December 26th, the 101st was relieved, and Hitler's offensive stalled. The Ghost Army's contribution was invisible. No dramatic photos, no front-page headlines. But Bradley, Simpson, and Patton knew the truth. 1,100 men with radio transmitters had helped save Bastogne. After Operation Kodak, the Ghost Army returned to regular deception missions, Operation Flaxweiler in January 1945, and Operation Landvillers in February. Each mission was more refined, more professional, and more dangerous as the men perfected their techniques. Learning that visual deception required clear sight lines, sonic deception needed the right terrain, and radio deception demanded perfect timing. But German intelligence was also learning, searching for patterns. Why did certain American units only appear at night? Why did some divisions generate radio traffic but never attack? Why did armored battalions vanish without leaving destroyed vehicles? Eventually, they would connect the dots, and the Ghost Army would become a top target. March 1945 brought their biggest operation yet, the Rhine crossing, the last major natural barrier before Germany's industrial heartland. A failed crossing could prolong the war for months. On March 18th at 2 p.m., Colonel Rear received orders for Operation Viersen, create the largest deception of the war, convincing the Germans the crossing would occur at Viersen, 15 miles north of the real crossing site at Remagen. The mission required every trick in their playbook, visual, sonic, and radio deception, plus special effects on an unprecedented scale. They had 4 days to prepare. March 18th to 21st. Setting up positions, inflating over 600 dummy vehicles, tanks, trucks, artillery, tank destroyers, in realistic tactical formations visible to German observation posts, stringing communication wires, positioning sound trucks, and establishing radio networks. The Sonic Company played recordings of tank movements, construction noise, and troop activity 24 hours a day, while radio operators simulated two-corps headquarters and dozens of battalion and regimental networks. Thousands of fake transmissions suggesting the Ninth Army was massing at Viersen. The operation went live on March 21st, and German artillery responded immediately with heavy bombardment, 155mm shells, the most intense fire the Ghost Army had ever faced. 3 men were wounded in the first hour. Shrapnel tore through a radio truck, destroying equipment, but operators moved to backup positions and kept transmitting. German reconnaissance flights increased, with Focke-Wulf 19s photographing the fake army every 6 hours. On March 23rd, the real crossing began at Remagen. Churchill tanks with fascines, amphibious vehicles, and combat engineers advanced under fire, but German resistance was lighter than expected. Intelligence had diverted forces north to counter the threat at Viersen. The Ninth Army established a bridgehead and pushed inland, crossing 20,000 men within 48 hours. General William Simpson, commander of the Ninth Army, sent a commendation. The Ghost Army's deception had drawn German reserves away from the main effort, saving thousands of lives. Operation Viersen would be their last major mission. 3 weeks later, Germany would surrender, ending the war in Europe. By then, the Ghost Army had completed 21 deception operations across France, Luxembourg, Belgium, and Germany, repeatedly fooling Hitler's intelligence services and saving an estimated 15,000 to 30,000 American lives, all in complete secrecy. On May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered. On May 10th, Colonel Rear assembled the unit in a field near Luxembourg and delivered a stunning announcement. Their records would be classified, all documentation sealed, equipment destroyed or locked away, and the men sworn to secrecy. They could not discuss their missions with family, fellow veterans, or anyone. Violation meant court-martial. They couldn't even admit to serving in the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. If asked, they'd served in regular combat units. The reason was simple. Their techniques, inflatable deception, sonic warfare, radio manipulation, were too valuable to disclose, and the Army wanted to preserve them for future conflicts. The men signed secrecy agreements. The unit officially disbanded on June 23, 1945, exactly 1 year after arriving in France. And the men shipped home on the USS General O. Ernst, retracing their 13-day Atlantic crossing. Most returned to civilian life immediately. Artists to their studios, engineers to their workshops, Bill Blass to New York, Ellsworth Kelly to Paris. They carried their secrets silently, unable to explain the gaps in their service records or share their war stories at veteran reunions. Bob Tompkins returned to his family, telling them only that he'd served with an engineering unit in France. His diary, kept in violation of security regulations, was hidden in a box. James Anderson, the Virginia mechanic who'd carved fake tank tracks, lived until 2018, aged 94. In one of his final interviews, he said the strangest part wasn't the danger, but the silence, carrying a secret for 70 years. The secrecy lasted 50 years. In 1996, the Pentagon declassified the Ghost Army's records. Researchers uncovered the full story, and filmmaker Rick Beyer interviewed surviving veterans to produce a PBS documentary in 2013. Finally, the Ghost Army became public knowledge. But most of the men had already died, never receiving recognition for their service. In 2024, 79 years after the war's end, Congress awarded the Ghost Army the Congressional Gold Medal, the highest civilian honor. 3 surviving veterans, all over 95 years old, Seymour Nussenbaum, John Chrisman, and Bernard Bluestein, attended the ceremony. Senator Edward Markey noted, "The soldiers recruited for the Ghost Army were not only men of muscle, they were also men of the mind." The Ghost Army's legacy endures. Their techniques, many still classified, laid the groundwork for modern military deception. Inflatable decoys, electronic warfare, and deception operations used by militaries worldwide. They proved a fundamental truth about warfare. Sometimes the most effective weapon isn't firepower, but creativity. One question remains: how many lives did they save? Military historians debate the number. Conservative estimates put it at 15,000, optimistic at 30,000. But the exact count is unknowable. What is certain is that every repositioned German artillery piece, every diverted division, every delayed attack meant fewer American soldiers facing enemy fire. The last piece of Ghost Army equipment, an inflatable Sherman tank, now sits in the National World War II Museum in New Orleans. 93 pounds of rubber that helped win a war. They fought without firing a shot, deceived without betraying their own command, and saved lives by risking their own, all in complete silence. If this story moved you, hit that like button right now. Every like tells YouTube to show this to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We rescue forgotten war stories every week. Real soldiers, real courage, real history. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Texas, Germany, the United Kingdom, Australia, Canada. And did anyone in your family serve in World War II? Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines? Which theater, Europe or Pacific? If you're a veteran yourself from any war or branch, thank you. Share your story in the comments. Our community spans the globe, and you're not just watching, you're keeping these memories alive. Thank you for ensuring the Ghost Army doesn't disappear into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen.